Well, hey everyone, good to see you again. Here we are, Bible in 1 year. We're going to jump right into it in First Chronicles 17. There's a whole lot of stuff happening here, and the one thing that I really want to focus on is really just David's humility in this whole story. We're going to jump right out of the gate in verse 1, and here's what it says. In verse 1, it says, "After David was settled in his palace, he said to Nathan the prophet, 'Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of the covenant of the Lord is under a tent.'" You see, back in the day, cedar wood was actually a really expensive wood in that time. And so here's David. He's living in an expensive home while the ark of the covenant of the Lord is under a tent. You see, David was actually having trouble by the thought of him living in a really nice home, a nicer home than the ark of the covenant and where that was. And so therefore, he wants to build God a temple. So long story short, God responds, and there's two things that God says that I want to focus on. The first thing is that God says no. He says no. You see, because David was a man of war and there was so much bloodshed. You're going to hear about this later on in 1 Chronicles 22. But however, a temple will be built, and it's going to be through the son Solomon, who is a man of rest. And so the first thing that God does is he says no. The second thing, all right, God also says in verse 10 that he's actually going to build David a house. And so here's David. He's wanting to build God a house, but instead God in return says, "No, I'm going to build you a house." And this is really talking about establishing, a dynasty and a legacy long after David dies. And so there's really two learnings that I want to focus on. And the first is David's response to God's no. Okay, God says no. You see David, he's not like, well, okay, I guess it's not my responsibility then, or you don't see him getting frustrated that God is not doing what David originally wanted. No, instead, okay, and you're going to read about this again later on in chapter 29, you find out that he's actually purchasing. He's actually gathering and buying all the materials needed for the construction. Not that, not what he's going to build, where he's going to get the credit, but rather what his son Solomon is going to build. And so here's the first question, is how do you respond to God's no, right? Do you throw your hands up and get frustrated and focus on what you can't do versus what you can do? Or do you accept it in humility, understanding that God knows best, and even though you might not get the glory or the credit, you will humbly submit to the one who God has called to lead? And so how do you respond to God's no? And here's the other learning. Here's the second question, okay? David's response to God building him a house instead of him building God a house. You see in verse 16, David says this. He says, "Who am I, Lord God, and what is my family that you have brought me this far?" You see, when David received this gift, you do not get a sense that he felt that it made him greater, but rather that it made God greater. So here's the question. How many times when we receive something great, okay, whether it's a promotion, a reward, a prize, whatever it is, that, when you receive it, it naturally puts us up on a pedestal in the eyes of others in this world, how do you respond? Do you say, I deserve, or do you say, he deserves? Do you say, I am great for look at the things that I have done, or do you say, he is great for look at the things that he has done? So those are the two questions to focus on for today, is how do you respond to God's no? And the second one is, how do you respond to God's blessing that naturally elevates you in the eyes of others in this world? And so let's be those who trust, let's be those who submit and give God the credit in all the things that he does in and through us. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.